Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. New videos of hostages in Gaza prompt Netanyahu to seek Red Cross help as pressure mounts on all sides to reach a humanitarian breakthrough. US envoy Steve Witkoff may visit Moscow this week as President Trump warns Russia to end the war in Ukraine or face new sanctions. And preparing for kickoff, Chinese robot soccer teams get ready for the first robot games in Beijing. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is asking the Red Cross to help feed and treat hostages in Gaza after new videos showed them severely malnourished. Hamas says it's willing to allow access, but only if Israel opens a permanent aid corridor and pauses airstrikes during deliveries. The footage has sparked outrage in Israel and pushed the UN Security Council to schedule an emergency session for Tuesday. To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by Managing Director of This Is Dubai and Dubai 92 presenter, Jono Hayes. Michael Jabri-Pickett, we left your name out there, but welcome to the show. Firstly, so let's start off with the story. So obviously, for weeks now, we have been talking about the horrific pictures we've seen coming out of Gaza of the malnutrition, people at aid sites, the desperation. But why has this particular footage of Israeli hostages really had such an impact?
I think because for a couple of reasons. You can see before and after pictures. With the Palestinians, as horrific as it is, we don't know what each individual Palestinian looked like before. And we have a face, we have a name, and I think for Israelis in particular, and even for the global community, because you'll see the pictures of the before and after, but you'll also see a name attached to this person. You'll see an age. Yeah, maybe you'll see the profession as well. And I think that puts a face on it. And I think it also brings it home for the Israelis in particular. It's no longer just some unknown person who may be being held. They now know that this is, a fellow Israeli. This is someone who is one of us. And I think it just makes it a little bit more personal than it did before.
Yes, and of course, we know the beginning of the story. He was at a Nova festival in the kibbutz, and people knew the situation that people were taken in. And obviously, the families have been protesting for so long to get these members back into Israel and back safe. But now that it looks like Benjamin Netanyahu wants to use the Red Cross to get aid in, Hamas is saying if you have these certain conditions, we'll agree to that. We'll make sure these hostages are fed and looked after. Is that sort of a positive momentum that we're seeing? We're seeing almost communication now between Hamas and Israel when it comes to open humanitarian corridors.
I think what Netanyahu wants right now is to try and get people back on side once again. And I think the language that's been used is important to take into consideration here as well. When he gave that speech earlier on, a lot of the language that was used was very hard-hitting. And I think that that's a huge play to try and get support back on side again, because within his own government, there has been a split. And now we're seeing 600 retired Israeli security officials, former Mossad and Shin Bet leaders as well, who've all made rare appeals to Donald Trump saying, we need your help to stop the Gaza war. The message that they have behind that is saying that Hamas no longer poses a threat, a massive threat to Israel, and they're saying we need interjection here to stop the war. So I think what Netanyahu requires right now is to ensure he continues to get the support of his people, because we don't know what things are like on the ground for him in Israel with his party and with his people.
And he is convening a cabinet meeting this week. We know that is happening. And what we're getting so far from reports of that cabinet meeting that is being convened is they want to outline the end goals when it comes to Gaza. They want to outline their proposals for the war. And I do think that that is, like Jono says, an interesting card to play for Netanyahu, because right now, where is he in the political front in Israel. It seems very split as we do see demonstrations in the streets in Tel Aviv, and things are becoming a little bit difficult now because we saw Ben Gvir at Al-Aqsa Mosque over the weekend, which drew a lot of criticism. So things are difficult for Netanyahu politically.
And I think that Ben Gvir at Al-Aqsa is a perfect example of just how difficult a position he's in. Because, as we've talked about, he has so many right-wing hawks in his cabinet. And if some of those people decide they're going to leave, then he's in a position where his government probably will not survive. So he has to be, and this is, there was this massive number of former prime ministers, former generals, IDF members who are retired, who came forward and signed a document saying, look, Hamas is no longer a threat at this moment, and what is the strategy? And if Benjamin Netanyahu is going to survive beyond this year and beyond the war, once hopefully there is a ceasefire, he's going to have a very clear strategy about what it is that he wants to do. And he hasn't explained that. He hasn't gone into detail. He's talked about destroying Hamas. He's talked about bringing the hostages back, but he hasn't said, okay, then what? And I would say, if Hamas were to give Israel everything that it wants today, they'll lay down their arms and they'll give back all the hostages, the fallen as well as those who are still alive, what then? And I don't know that anyone in Israel has, thought about it, and I'm pretty sure that the Prime Minister does not want the war to end, but I'm also pretty sure that he doesn't have a clear strategy that would allow him to convince the UN and the international community that this is the way forward.
But many Arab countries have been saying that. They say we've got a plan in place that we want to implement, we think will work, something that has been rejected by Israel. But a lot of analysts, Michael, are also saying the US doesn't have a path forward either for the future of Gaza. So that will be an interesting cabinet meeting this week. But Jono, we've also spoken about this before on the show, and no international journalists are allowed into Gaza at all. And that's something Israel said right from the beginning almost. And now over 100 journalists have signed a petition demanding unsupervised foreign press access to the Gaza Strip. Do you think Israel are ready to give these journalists permission?
As a short answer, I think it's unlikely in the short term. But I think in order to be able, he'll have to have international pressure. Otherwise, I don't see this happening, political pressure, or otherwise key allies like the US interjecting here and saying, we need to let journalists in. Keeping in mind, this is a war zone. 174 journalists, 170 of those are Palestinians, 4 are Israeli, who have been killed since the start of this conflict on the ground in the line of duty. The GHF are, according to Israel, doing amazing work in order to be able to distribute
and also,
aid.
according to the US envoy who was there,
well,
we saw...
when Witkoff went to see it...
And Mike Huckabee.
And they're doing amazing work. If that's allegedly true, which is what we've been led to believe, let the journalists in. Let us see what is happening on the ground, because currently we're dealing with second-hand information, which is primarily through social media and a limited amount of videos like what we're seeing on the screen at the moment. We don't have any actual impartiality on the ground to find out what is the real situation. From a Hamas point of view, we're hearing stories from several sources saying that Hamas are taking the aid before it even gets to those who most need it. We're seeing videos of aid that's been sent from the UAE for sale at street markets, which we know has been dropped in. But if the GHF really are doing such an amazing job on the ground and are getting that aid out to the people who need it most, and are, as they say, giving out 2 million hot meals every single day, where are the proof? Where's the proof of this? The videos of misappropriation of aid that continue to flood out of Gaza will continue until such a time as that independent journalists are able to get on the ground and see what's actually happening.
But one of the things I would add, one caveat to your comments, is that there are some impartial people. We've had British, American, Canadian, Australian doctors who have gone in for weeks at a time to treat the injured in Gaza, and they've come out and they've just talked about how horrific the situation is. But that's firsthand information. What you need are professional storytellers, right? You need the journalists to go in to be able to do the job that they are paid to do and what they've been trained their whole life to do. But Israel, at this point, the images, what's turned the international community are these images. At this moment, there's no way that they're going to allow journalists to go in now when it's absolutely at the worst for the Israeli government.
What we are also seeing as well, and obviously when Steve Witkoff went and we saw this, what I would like to call a best foot forward approach, we're seeing things working really well. And I think that's very much, it may have been a staged video that was put on. You will do that if you're going to have an envoy who's on board for a couple of hours, to be able to portray the best possible light on the GHF, because, and you've spoken to many people before who said the GHF simply does not work. And even on the ground, that people who are making their way to get aid were being shot at will. So you're hearing stories of that, and at the same time the GHF showing a video of how wonderful it is to Steve Witkoff. Two very conflicting stories.
Just the numbers. GHF has 4 distribution food sites, whereas the UN had 400. I don't know how you can compare those.
And like you say, it's very difficult to get the truth, because we've interviewed so many people on the show, doctors who are working in the hospitals inside of Gaza, doctors who've been there and left. We've spoken to so many variety of people, and it's really difficult. The stories are horrific, but then we'll speak to the side of Israel and it'll be a different story. So there needs, like you say, for us to actually get to the heart of the story and know the truth. But thank you so much for your thoughts on that story. Stay right there as we move on to another story now. And US President Donald Trump says his special envoy may head to Moscow this week ahead of an August the 8th deadline he set for Russia to end its war on Ukraine or face fresh sanctions. Trump didn't confirm if Steve Witkoff would meet President Putin, but said the message is simple: get a deal where people stop getting killed. The Kremlin hasn't confirmed the visit, but says it's always glad to see Witkoff. There we are. So Friday is the deadline. It's fast approaching. And you could argue, really, Jono and Michael, we've heard it all before. We've discussed this all before on the show. Will the sanction deadline make any difference, or will it sort of make Putin come to the... I mean, what's the answer here?
I think sanction fatigue is something that we've heard in the last couple of weeks, and I think that has really been felt right now when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, because we hear about sanctions over and over every couple of days and new sanctions being placed. What Russia has done, and it's done it quite well, it's managed to make itself relatively self-sufficient so that the sanctions don't really matter that much, but also build strong coalition ties with China, with India, and with countries that they can directly trade with without the sanctions really affecting them. So in short, I think it's unlikely that Moscow will see this as any sort of a threat or any sort of a back down. And they don't deal well when it's an ultimatum. They don't respond well to it in any way whatsoever. So I think the sanctions in the initial time, which would have been September the 2nd, and now we're moved forward to this week, it's not going to make much of a difference. And you have to question, well, what will they do? What sanctions could you possibly impose upon Moscow to say, right, we need some change now? And I don't know if anyone can actually correctly identify what that would be.
And I was speaking to a political analyst a little bit earlier, and he was talking to me from Moscow. And I asked him about the sanctions and said these are secondary sanctions, so they'll affect the countries that are buying from Russia, like India and China. And he said the feeling inside Russia, Michael, is really, well, Donald Trump's trying to impact those economies more than it is Russia. So what's the truth? That's kind of what President Putin and the Kremlin's rhetoric is around this.
Yeah, for President Putin, this doesn't affect me. This is going to affect your relationships with India and China. So why am I fussed about this? This is, say what you will, he has been single-minded and strategic, Vladimir Putin has, about what it is that he wants to achieve, and he's going about that. And right now he's using, as we've talked about, the nice summer months to achieve as much as he possibly can on the ground. So if he ever does come to the negotiating table, he's going to be in a much stronger position than he would be if he were to start negotiations 3 months ago or even today.
But this is the 5th time we've seen Steve Witkoff go over to Moscow, and he's going this week as the pressure mounts. Donald Trump said he was going to get a deal done in 24 hours. That didn't happen. But the reality is, it's just talks about talks. And are we just locked in a frustrating circle now where nothing seems to be done, but people are still losing their lives?
What you have to ask the question is, what do Russia see Steve Witkoff as? And I think he's an emissary to Trump more than anything else. He's seen as a glorified messenger more than anything else. He is going in to take those messages back. I think the team being sent in, and it's happened repeatedly again, is to look tough on Russia, but it's all bark, no bite. There's no teeth being shown here whatsoever. And it seems to be very much we'll walk away with yet more sanctions being put in place without any actual change from the Kremlin whatsoever, and no reason to. Because, like we said, for many, many years, Russia have managed to survive tougher sanctions than what we're seeing imposed upon them now with pretty much zero repercussions. They persevere.
And Michael, Russia has responded to Donald Trump's movement of nuclear submarines, and we saw that happen over the weekend after we heard from a former Russian president. They don't seem to be intimidated by this movement or threat, whatever you'd like to call it at all.
No, in fact, I think Dmitry Peskov, the spokesperson, the Russian spokesperson, I thought he was a little bit more diplomatic than certainly Donald Trump. I think he was more mature. I think he took the high ground as best a Russian politician at this time can when your country's invaded another country. I think he helped to calm the situation. And that, you can look to that and see, unfortunately, the difference that a former Russian president and a current US president are getting into a social media squabble that requires the US president to talk about the movement of nuclear weapon submarines, which is completely beyond the pale of what would have happened in the past. And yet the Russians seem to be very stoic, and they approach it like it's very much a business matter. It's funny, I think that they're approaching all of this, their interactions with Donald Trump, as well as the war in the Ukraine, like a business transaction. They're not getting emotional, which is when you see Donald Trump heading off to the helicopter outside the White House, you know, he'll swear, he'll get emotional. He's genuinely flummoxed, so it seems. And I think it's one of the issues that he faces is that he doesn't have a strong cabinet. He has a lot of inexperienced loyalists rather than experienced diplomats. Traditionally, when you would have somebody go in and meet the Russian president, you would have a team of 10 or 12 people there assessing the situation, taking notes, making sure that they got everything correct. And by all accounts, when Steve Witkoff goes in, he's usually by himself with a translator. Now, he's a very successful real estate developer, but that's what he is. And it just feels like Donald Trump doesn't prioritize it, because the man who is supposed to solve the war in the Ukraine is also the one that's supposed to solve the war between Hamas and the Israelis. Like, there should be teams of people who are camped out in those situation rooms constantly trying to push both sides to come together. And when you have one man who's expected to do it all, and this is not a career diplomat, this is somebody who has very little experience on that global stage, and yet that's the expectation that Donald Trump thrusts upon him.
And I think that's the concern, is that a lot of people would say the international diplomacy focus has been on Gaza, and therefore Ukraine is at risk of this becoming somewhat of a frozen disagreement more than anything else, in a conflict that just doesn't go anywhere. And it ends up in a stalemate of Russia puts forward a little bit of pressure, takes some ground, Ukraine pushes back, and this could go on for a very, very long time. And again, like Michael rightly said, Steve Witkoff may not be the man for the job on this, because he simply is not cut out for it. That's not his speciality.
Well, let's see what happens this week. But also, of course, Europe is involved in the mix, and NATO. That's another side to the Ukraine and Russia war. That is another big driver to wanting it to end. So let's see if all parties can come together. Thanks for your thoughts on that. Let's move on now. And the world's most high-tech football game got underway in Beijing on Monday. The two teams were made up entirely of robots with 5 players each. Developed by engineering students, the humanoid robots took part in a training match ahead of the World Humanoid Robot Games, set to begin on the 15th of August. Camille Nedelek has more.
It's a far more sedate football game than many fans will be used to. 2 humanoid robot teams of 5 faced off in a training match in the run-up to the first World Humanoid Robotics Games next week. It's a chance for the engineering students who created them to show off their research.
This is our first time participating in such a world-class competition. We're excited to be able to compete with team members from all over the world, right here at home.
While these steps across the pitch are unsteady, China has been making big strides in developing advanced humanoid robotics. Beijing has put humanoids at the heart of its robotics strategy, believing this could be the answer to an aging population and a shrinking workforce. This may look like a training ground for playing football, but it's also a training ground for the country's next generation of carers and factory workers.
Our advantages are that our team has a clear division of labor, and we can quickly adjust according to the venue, the opponent's strategy, and the environment, and then get a good result.
China's robotics industry is heavily subsidized, which has turbo-driven its shift to automation. More than half of all industrial robots installed around the world are installed in China. It only entered the top 10 in 2019. It's now at number 3. But official figures lag behind. And the US Chamber of Commerce in China notes that Beijing is being increasingly opaque about just how advanced its robotics have become. After a slow start, and watching and learning from other innovators, China may have already caught up and won the game. A strategy also used by these robots.
We used imitation learning to teach them. The robot watches human movements and goes through tens of thousands of simulations so that it learns the essence of those movements. It dribbles the ball like a human, and it can kick the ball like a human.
But unlike a human, these footballers aren't paid millions. And if they fall, there are no theatrics. They just get back up again and carry on. Camille Nedelec, Arabiya English.
Well, there we are. At least they helped each other get back up. But what do you make of this idea? And will you be signing up to watch a robot football game or soccer game, whatever you wish to call it?
So I will not, but I do appreciate, as the journalist said, that there were no theatrics. So maybe this would eliminate the diving from football. But I do think as a sports spectacle, this was incredibly boring. But as a scientific experiment, and that's where I think it's headed. I think, we were all shocked as a global community when, the Chinese released DeepSeek and how much it had progressed compared to what the Americans were doing. And DeepSeek is founded on an open source principle. And I think that means that the AI that the Chinese community is developing is something that's going to be incredibly valuable for other Chinese AI-focused companies. And I think it's going to mean that these are the things that they're doing that are making news. But I also believe that these are the opportunities that will be presented to them, which means that they will then become even smarter and more capable of developing AI in so many different applications.
No, I absolutely agree with that. And what Camille also said there is the Chinese have been a little bit opaque about how far ahead they are when it comes to things like OpenAI and when it comes to artificial intelligence. And then we see something like this happen. And Jono, almost you think, oh, now I know what it's going to like to live next to a robot. Like, it almost brings that, I wouldn't want to watch the game. It looks dire and boring, but good on those students because they did more than me at university, clearly. But I just want to, but it's also, gosh, that integration is not that far away when you watch something like this.
No, and I think if this is what we're getting to see, I think what's gone on behind the scenes is far more terrifying. There's video images of the last couple of days of a humanoid robot with almost perfect mimicking of human motion, range of motion, which has been one of the more difficult things from anyone who's ever watched a movie about robots to try and emulate, is that movement, that fluid movement. And I think with developments in hydraulics, you'll end up with a robot that's able to move much more fluidly than what looks quite awkward, as you can see on the screen. This is a very awkward moving robot. I mean, the good thing is that these robots don't require brakes, they don't get injured, they don't retire, they just need WD-40 and some batteries, and that's it. But does it work as a sport? I think there's some sports that it could work in. I don't believe football or soccer is one of those sports. I think these contact sports, they require the heart that human interaction brings to it, that robots simply just cannot emulate. There's other sports whereby, even if you take into example horse racing, yes, the jockey's an integral part, but could easily be replicated with a robot that's on board, controlled by somebody, because the game that you see in front of you with this soccer is not really testing the skills of the robot. It's testing the coding ability of somebody behind the scenes, in which case, this is technically not a field sport, this is an e-sport. And obviously there's been a huge jump forward in the MENA region for esports with the esports festival in Saudi only a couple of weeks ago. There has been huge leaps and bounds in that. But what you're seeing here is glorified esports, on the pitch versions of FIFA 2025 being played on a PlayStation, but in real life.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. And when I look at it, it's as Beijing prepares to host the 2025 Global Games, you know, global and robot football, there's probably going to be a massive spectacle. But at the same time, I was thinking about it. I love sport. We love the personalities. I think there's not enough personalities in sport now anyway, you know, because of the money involved. But one thing it could help in is training, because if they're able to use all this technology, it probably could help the real human footballer nail their game, get things that they're doing slightly wrong tweaked, you know, because of all of that can work together. So maybe, Jono and Michael, I'll become a better tennis player, you might become a better ice hockey player, and John, I'm not sure what sport you play, golf?
It's sleepy, well, no, I'm not.
Okay, might become a better...
But I do think that, you know, one of the things that was always admired, especially by the old East German athletes, there was a mechanical and robot aspect to them because they were trained the same way over and over and over and over again. Yes, they often used performance-enhancing drugs, but in the 70s and the 80s, when you looked at some of those communist country athletes where it was just repetition over and over and over again, and if some of these robots can, as you said, be used in training situations, then, you know, there may be real benefits. But I can't imagine we're going to get to the point where, like, to your point, I think watching certain e-sport activities on TV are so much more interesting than this.
And I think Tesla have done a phenomenal job with their version of the robot as well. And again, we've made it into a humanoid robot. I don't know what the fascination is with us as human beings to try and make a robot that looks exactly like us. It's almost as if nobody's ever seen any movie that there are robots in before in their lives. But a robot that's able to cook and clean and do your housework doesn't necessarily have to look like a human. We just, as humans, find it much easier to integrate with this being if it looks like one of us.
Or maybe more comforted because it looks more like us. It's not so mechanical.
Yeah, it's a familiarity thing.
Yeah.
And I think we are, if we're not already there, and I think it's likely that if Tesla have done the developments that they said they would be doing on their robot, and if China are here with what is effectively university students showcasing their science project, if that's what we're seeing in public, what's gone on behind the scenes is far more terrifying. And I think that is the level of concern that we'll be up to when it comes to AI potentially taking our jobs. When it's a humanoid robot that looks that realistic and lifelike, then you can start being concerned.
Well, we're lucky. We are maybe a little bit in the middle-aged generation, so maybe we still have our jobs for the next 15 years.
Or 10.
Oh, 10. There we are. Let's move on to another story now. And 2025 is shaping up to be the year of the remake, with several Hollywood sequels already released in the cinema and streaming platforms, and many more are actually in the works. Hollywood execs are opting to sign off on old favourites like Freaky Friday, Happy Gilmore and Naked Gun in a bid to attract audiences. But questions are being asked about a lack of originality, creativity, and a failure to take risks when it comes to films. So, Jono, have everybody just basically run out of any new ideas? Is Hollywood just stagnant?
Well, an AI robot would probably come up with new ideas, but I think it's not necessarily that Hollywood is stagnant, but nostalgia does sell, and that's for sure. Things that are nostalgic and remind us of our youth are more likely to get people to spend money to go and see them because of curiosity, to see how is the remake, is it better than the original, is this a sequel, is it a prequel, whatever the case may be, people will go and see it from that point of view. And I think there are only so many stories that are out there that you have to be able to take book versions of and make them into mini-series or TV shows or movies, as the case may be. And there's a limited number of creme de la creme who've had really big success. And you think, right, we've hit the nail on the head with this once. Let's do it again and again and again. And I think the Jurassic Park franchise is probably one of the best examples. The original movie, arguably my favorite movie of all time. And then everything after that was quite lackluster. But not always the case. And I would say that potentially sometimes the remake is not only as good as the original, but also supersedes it and becomes more famous. For instance, Scarface is a remake of a 1932 movie. And Scarface is the iconic movie from 1983. Ocean's 11 is a remake of a 1960s movie called The Rat Pack. So these movies were remade, but they actually end up being better. So I think what Hollywood is trying to do is find that magic formula whereby they recreate a movie and it becomes better. By default, they've just created a new masterpiece. And I mean, Snow White is likely not that. The Lion King, arguably because it's a different take on it, maybe that.
But I quite enjoyed the Lion King remake, which I thought I wouldn't because I loved the original Lion King. But I didn't mind the remake, to be honest with you. But I can't believe some of these films came out 20 years ago. If we look at Freaky Friday, that's part of our culture, isn't it? We were all teenagers when that came out. But I wonder if... You say it's about nostalgia. Why are you laughing?
Not all of us were teenagers when it came out.
Oh, yeah. Michael wasn't a teenager.
I was not, no.
But I want to include you in the group, you know,
My
so
children
you
were
don't feel...
teenagers.
so you don't feel too left out. But you could argue, perhaps, Hollywood doesn't want to take a chance on something new, like something completely out there, something completely different, because it's all about money and monopolising things. And I wonder if that's also just sort of choking creativity in some respects.
So this is actually not something that's incredibly new. The way that Hollywood has the way that they're operating now is how they have operated for almost 100 years. And I'll give you an example. One of my favorite movies, not because I was around when it was made, premiere, is The Maltese Falcon. The book, Dashiell Hammett, published 1930. But in 31, there was a film. And then 36, there was a film. 41 is the one that I like, Humphrey Bogart, John Huston directed. And then there was another one in 75. So that is...
Is it in black and white, Michael?
The 41 one and the 31 and the 36, yes. The 75, no.
OK.
But my point is this, that when that film came out, it was based on a book, and then there were 4 film adaptations. And that's not so different than what we're experiencing now. The other thing that is incredibly important, and I think plays a large part, is that a lot of films want an IP, an intellectual property aspect to it. They want to go in knowing that there's something that they can sell as soon as the film hits movie theaters. And then the third component is that today, unlike back in the day, today, most studios are owned by big corporations, sometimes publicly traded corporations, which means that they definitely need to show that what they're building and creating is actually turning a massive profit. And it's easier for them to almost guarantee success if they know going in that this is a tried and true formula because it has worked so many times, so we'll just roll it out once more time.
Do you buy the merch when you watch a film?
It depends on what the merchandise is. And I think certain movies, merchandise simply wouldn't work. And I know there's a remake of Jaws on the cards. And my concern with a movie like that is that the original grainy quality of a 1980s movie on VHS gave something special element to that. You recreate it now, it's going to require CGI. It's going to look like, you know, The Meg and one of those movies. You lack the ability for it to be now believable, and you've now taken on a whole different guise with it as well. But again, exactly to Michael's point, something like the Pirates franchise allows Disney to create a theme park ride, a stack of franchise, and various different things that go along with it. Shrek, likewise as well. Pixar have had great success with creating walk-around characters for theme parks.
I bought a donkey, teddy bear, of Donkey from Shrek. I love that thing.
Is that adults and kids alike will spend their money on something that they think this has got. But the nostalgia factor, I think we can't overrate that as well. There's something very comforting about going to watch a movie that we know and love. We know maybe what the storyline is. We probably know what the outcome is. And safe of actually creating prequels and sequels for every other single movie, I think that's what Hollywood's trying to do right now, is to recreate that nail-on-the-head moment again that they had with big movies that won Oscars like Titanic or, you know. I
mean, they're doing it with Harry Potter. You know, each book...
Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find
Them.
Well,
there was that.
Yeah, there's
now,
that too.
HBO is going to be doing a season of 10 episodes, or 8 or 10 episodes each season, and each season is based on a book. Well, we all know who hasn't seen and read the books, and yet they're going to do it again. And because, to your point, there's a nostalgia aspect of it. And I think that there's also a familiarity. And in this society in which we live today, where so many people can get anxious so easily, they will re-watch Friends or Seinfeld or so many other old sitcoms because you know what's going to happen. There's a predictability to it, and that familiarity relaxes people. So if they know that they're going to go to see, say, Harry Potter, or they're going to watch it streaming, there's a comfort factor because they get to assess something compared to what they know, but there's also, they know how it's going to turn out, and that will give them a sense of comfort, and maybe that will help them spend more money.
And I do think it's only a matter of time before we end up recycling the same stories again, simply because the perfect example is The Simpsons, who are famously have said to have predicted so many things in history. That's not the case. The fact of the matter is The Simpsons have been on air for 38 years.
Hundreds of thousands of episodes.
Everything you can think of has at some point been referenced in The Simpsons. And it's not that they're predicting the future, it's that they've quite literally exhausted all possible avenues. And that's where Hollywood is right now. They've exhausted all possible outcomes of all movies. And Safe doing Titanic follow-up on her entire story from when she got off the boat to when she passed away, there's very little else that we can do movie-wise that's not already been done.
No, really interesting. I'm so glad I've got two movie lovers here because I'm not very good on this genre, but I did try. Might go and watch Freaky Friday too. Why not? And finally, Michael and Jono have come up with a couple of quirky stories of the day. And Michael, I actually think yours is really heartfelt. It is quirky, but it's all about anti-poaching and this big campaign that is happening in South Africa, really to save the rhinos.
Well, I think you like it because it's probably, in your mind, attractive animals that are being saved. For me, I think that's what's most interesting about it is it starts with a great stat that at the start of the 20th century, there were 500,000 rhinos globally. Conservationists today estimate that there are probably about 27,000. Now, about 500 a year are poached, and what they're trying to do is prevent the smugglers from being inspired to take the horns off of the rhinos. So they have, after scientifically testing this and assuring everybody that there is no harm done to the rhino, they are injecting radioactive isotopes into the horns of the rhino so that those can be detected by when people are bringing them through customs. Even if it's in a 40-foot shipping container, the devices that the customs officials would be using to see if there are any smuggled goods, they'd be able to find those smuggled rhinos. And of course, they're used in traditional Chinese medicines and sometimes for carving of ornate objects as well.
Beautiful, absolutely majestic rhinos. Part of the Big Five, of course, the Africa's Big Five. I've seen many in my life. And it just seems so sad that they have to try all these things to save them. We know, Jono, they previously used dye to dye the horn, so they couldn't be resellable.
A lot of the APUs that operate in South Africa still use a dye whereby they'll sedate down the rhino, but they'll also dehorn the rhino. And there is something that's quite sad, and there's a few places like Tanzania, you go to there and you can see rhino with their original horns, but they're at such a high value per gram, and we're talking thousands and thousands of dollars for rhino horn, that you can see these rhinos but no horn, and it feels like they're incomplete. So to be able to actually retain that and keep it, I think is something very, very special and something that humanity needs to see.
Oh, absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. Anything to preserve the wildlife. And Jono, also something that you've come up with, actually, almost half of us believe our friends are using weight loss jabs, but tell us more about the story.
Well, 2 in 5 of us said that we think that one of our friends are using weight loss treatments, but the majority of us are afraid to ask them, which is the concern. 13% of us say a close friend is likely to be using some sort of a weight loss jab, but they'd never ask because it's none of their business, because you're worried about offending people. Also, there's the concern that what if you're wrong? You say to somebody, oh, I think, how are you looking? You're looking so well, must be the Ozempic, and then they say, I'm not actually on Ozempic, and then
I'm on Mounjaro.
It's your work colleagues, your neighbours, and Gen X women are the most suspicious, but also the most hesitant to bring it up because they don't want to offend anybody as well. But everyone that was asked in this survey can name at least one, if not more, people that they think are on a weight loss jab at the moment.
I don't think it's offensive to ask people or to say, you look really good. Have you been on the jabs? Have you been to the gym? I don't know. Isn't that a compliment, though? If someone says you've been on weight loss jabs, you almost think that you look quite slender if you're trying to lose weight.
I think that it can be tricky because, you know, we've seen a couple of actors just in the last few years who have become quite thin when they've been seen in public. And it turns out that they were dying. And they wanted to not say anything publicly. So that isn't necessarily the case, of course, with a colleague, but you don't know in 2025, you don't know what's going on and what people are keeping private. And so when you do see somebody who's come back after maybe they were on maternity leave or an extended grief period or whatever the case is, and you see, or you see a friend you haven't seen for a long time, and if that person has lost an awful lot of weight, I think back in the day, the inclination would have been to say, oh, you look fantastic, you know, what are you doing? Now, it could be the jab and they don't want to talk about it. It could be genuine working out, and maybe they are comfortable talking about it. It could be that they're sick. It could be something else that's going on. And so I think the safest bet is to maybe notice it, maybe go home and tell your partner, but certainly not to ask the person.
Well, I think, and a lot of people, certainly colleagues of mine, will go around the office and almost try and guess who is and who's not on Ozempic, Mounjaro, take your pick.
How many big people do you have in the office?
There's a lot less now. but what I will say is that it's probably akin to saying to somebody, how far along are you? And then discovering they're not pregnant is to say to somebody, you've lost a lot of weight. How long have you been on Mounjaro? Because again, like Michael said, what if it is something that's wrong? Or what if they have put in the hard graft and you just haven't noticed because you haven't seen them in a while and they've gone out there, worked hard and lost the weight? But I think we're at the early stages of these weight loss medications in that it's not got the same universally accepted methodology that we would have for, say, cosmetic procedures, where someone comes in and you see that their lips are twice the size and they're either allergic to something or they've had something done. Likewise, their face no longer moves and you think, okay, you've had Botox. People are more willing, and men especially, I think, we're more willing to own up to any cosmetic procedures we've had done. And that's in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
I think that's a post-pandemic type thing where men were now okay with saying, yeah, my face doesn't move, this is why. And I think we're probably a little bit away from that with Mounjaro and Wegovy just yet.
But what?
Sorry, I just want to say this. I do think that because we see so much on social media and we see so many people who share far too much on social media, sometimes I think we might believe that that applies to everybody when maybe some people just don't want to share. Sorry.
No, that's a very good point. And I was also going to say social media has a part to play in this. And sometimes I do think that influencers and celebrities should be honest about taking something like Ozempic. And the reason I think that is because they're appealing to younger women who are very impressionable. So it goes around in a full circle again. But thank you so much for your thoughts on that. And of course, thanks to today's guest, Managing Director of This Is Dubai, Michael Jabri-Pickett, and Dubai 92 presenter, Jono Hayes. And that's all from us on W News Extra. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and of course follow us on X. GNT with Michal Prendergast is coming up next. Goodbye and thank you.